democracy looks like. Tell me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. Tell me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. We're in this together. We are in this together. We are in this together. Hello, helicopter. We are in this together.
Hi everyone, I'm April D'Amato, and I'm the host of In This Together. As a light worker, American, and a human, I believe that everyone should have the right to food, water, shelter, healthcare, education, and a government for the people. We are so out of balance in this country that I'm overwhelmed by the work that has yet to be done. And inside of me, I do believe that it is possible we can make it happen and make the changes that we really need. There's this belief in the light worker New Age community that you must focus on only the positive and never really look at any of the negative or the dark stuff that's happening. And, you know, a lot of people seem like, oh, that's fine, you'll be safe. But the reality is that's not okay. And that's actually kind of unacceptable if you think about it. And I remember for a long time, I believed in that notion as well. But now I realize it isn't the way it should be in this earth and at this time. And I really wanted to start bringing forward all that information that could be beneficial to everybody out here in our community. If we lived in just a little bubble and didn't have to worry about all the stuff that's happening, then we would be fine. But we live in this physical reality where we are actually governed by the rules of society and the rules of our government. And with that being said, it's time, like being friends, it's really time for us to get together, stand together, and create a love revolution. A light worker is a light being, healer, teacher, spiritual guide, and shaman, and it's our mission and responsibility to help this planet evolve, and evolution must come. If we learned anything as Americans this past year, it's that we have an opportunity to really challenge the system, create lasting change, and live the dream of unity. But how do we do that? What a great question that is. We start by exploring opportunities and possibilities that we may or may not be aware of in our own communities nearby us. This is what In This Together is all about. I hope to present to each and every one of you an opportunity with each episode of the show to understand how spiritual awakening and community activism work together to support our community, our country, and our planet, and to give you each a voice in how you can participate as well. So join me today on this first episode. We have Jan van Urk here with us from the Guilford Peace Alliance. Did you even know here in Guilford we have a Peace Alliance? I didn't know. I've been here for 5 years. And over the last 6 months, I had an awareness. I found back in March of this year in the local newspaper a little article about them, and found that they had a vigil on Saturday mornings, and I went and attended and I met with them. What a great group of people. And did you even know that they've been around for over 35 years? That was wonderful. It was amazing. So welcome, Jan.
Thanks very much. Glad to be here.
Thank you for being here. I'd love for you to tell me a little bit more about the Guilford Peace Alliance, but first I'd like to read one of the quotes from one of your handouts. Recently, Jan had provided me with some extra handouts with information that I thought would be beneficial to all of us. So here's the quote. Peace isn't the absence of war. It's the presence of social justice and equality in a society where people share wealth and ideas and care for our planet together. So let's start with that quote. I love it, by the way. It's a great quote. It totally goes along with what I'm doing here in the show, In This Together. So what does it mean? And when people think of peace, they immediately think of the opposite, which is war and violence. So please tell us more.
Yes, as you say, people do think of war immediately. They think that's what a peace group is for. But one of our mottos is peace is more than the absence of war. And it's the presence. It's the presence of things. It's the presence of social unity, of social justice in a group of people who want to share wealth, ideas, and caring for the planet. For me, this goes back to the founding of Guilford, because people probably know that Guilford was founded in 1639. And the people came together in a covenant called the Guilford Plantation Covenant. And they said that they were going to join together in one plantation and be helpful to each other in common tasks according to every man's ability and as need shall require. So this town began with a promise to share work and resources for the benefit of the whole community. And this was already following on an idea that was present even earlier in 1630 when Governor Winthrop in Massachusetts talked about a covenant. And he said that the country was founded on the intention for everyone to take what he needs and to share the rest. This is, by the way, this very famous passage that you often hear about the United States being a city on a hill that Ronald Reagan used. Mm-hmm. Governor Winthrop doesn't talk about it being a shining city, but he really meant something quite different by it than what President Reagan said. The idea of the city on a hill is that when the settlers, the colonists, came to this country, they had made a kind of promise to form a righteous kingdom where they would all share and all be equal. And because they'd made that covenant, he thought in the presence of God, they were like a city on a hill. That is, it's something that's sticking out. They've made themselves conspicuous in the landscape with this promise. And if they break the promise, they will destroy the country because they'll have broken their covenant. The covenant they made with God in the presence of God. Mm-hmm. So that's what is really meant by this quotation about the city on the hill, that in order for the country to exist, it has to be founded on principles that are inclusive. And so one of the Peace Alliance's mottos too is all one people. And we feel as if people in this town, in this country, need to feel about each other as if we were all part of a family. And one part of society can't live at the expense of another part. And
that's really beautiful.
Whenever you have an imbalance, for instance, economic inequality in this country, if there are large numbers of people who are suffering, that imbalance will create war along with every other possible misfortune that you can think of. If people don't have health care, if they have an attitude that they want to live at the expense of other people, it will destroy the society. Of course, everybody knows that this country didn't begin with the European settlers. It was here thousands of years before. And native people still have, in the remnants of their culture, they still have that very strongly, that idea of sharing, that we're all part of a family with the earth and the water and all the animals and the plants and even the rocks. And that if you break that compact that we all have with the creation, if you break the compact with nature, for instance, if you try to make people live at the expense of nature, continually polluting it, contaminating it, overworking it, allowing business interests, for instance, short-term profit to destroy the land, then you destroy the foundation on which everyone lives.
You know, it's funny that you bring up that point. And I don't mean funny, haha. I actually mean funny. That's exactly what this awakening that I'm speaking of when I talk about light workers. You know, light workers are just all of us. We're just, each of us that are here to just shine the light of who we are, to be who we are. We just came here to be. We're not meant to have controls. We're not meant to destroy anything. We're meant to live together. We're all a piece of the puzzle. And so my belief, and many that are light workers, and I believe many people who don't even know they're light workers have the same belief system, that we're all piece of this puzzle. And we're all needed on this planet to help one another and to create what you're talking about, have that foundation. And there are people that are in need, and there's people here to help them. And at some point, there is a balance of that always. But unfortunately, we haven't been very balanced. And I feel at the time on the planet, as light workers, our job is to wake up to that fact and recognize it. And as I mentioned a little earlier, when I when I got into the light working world, I pulled away from human world, if you will, government. I actually have a background in government, working at the Capitol here in Hartford, and I was not happy. It made me very ill. I'm an empath, so I would feel everything, all the negativity. So I just withdrew and I left. And I thought, well, I can't do that. And I did follow that notion that, hey, there's no point in really putting the energy there. I want more happiness. Well, you know what? We can't have happiness if we're not all experiencing it. And that belief system of we're all one and being united is so important, especially when you think of what's happening now. The separation is what causes destruction and causes war, violence, and a lot of inequality that manifests more of that. And so I think that's a really beautiful, valid point that you shared with us. Thank you. So tell us, is this Peace Alliance, who's in it? What type of people are in it? And is it only Guilford residents?
Well, anyone could come and join. In fact, we have a lot of conversations with people even who come from other countries. Just this last weekend, someone stopped from Australia and talked with us. We've had Syrians, we've had French.
Where do they talk with you?
We are on the corner of the Guilford Green, opposite Page Hardware and Cilantro's. And we're there every Saturday morning from 11 to 12. And in fact, it's important that we're meeting on the green because the green was the common land that this town developed out of. And that was the center of the town.
So we gather.
And yes, we think of it as a sort of public forum where people can come along and talk to us about what they're concerned about. They don't need to agree with us about anything because, in fact, we have quite a variety of political and other opinions among ourselves, but we see it as a place where people can come and talk. For people who are actually interested in talking, responding to our signs, for instance, it's important to have that. I think it's important for every town to have places where people can just come and talk to each other. Then people will come up to us and they'll say, oh, look, we see your big banner that says this is a peace alliance, but you have a sign here that's about fracking, about fracked gas, or you have a sign about economic inequality. So what does that mean? Why are you carrying that sign? And
it makes for a great conversation.
It does. And then they'll talk to us about what their problems are. Sometimes people will come by. There was a homeless woman who had previously been homeless, who came and talked to us last week. And she told us her story and how she'd gradually found a place to live and fixed it up and was feeling much better about her life now. So people will come and talk if they're out of work or if they're angry because they feel exploited by other people because they have a job and nobody would be poor if they would just get out and work. That someone will come up and say that to us, and then we try to talk a little about, well, what about people who are already working 1 or 2 jobs and they're still having trouble making ends meet, or they're broke because of their health care and they don't have insurance? And we try to educate each other, first of all, about issues, and then to talk to other people. And often people bring insights to us that we hadn't thought about at all.
I think that's wonderful, and it's great conversation and having people kind of open their minds a little, even if they're saying, well, the person should just get a job. It's just that starts a conversation of recognizing that not everybody's in the same position. I was actually having a conversation with a friend earlier today about how, I see people dropping money constantly, buying all these things, and I think to myself, I don't live like that. That's not how I choose to live my life. It's a choice. But also, I think when people do that, are they really understanding that not everybody has that ability to do that? I mean, there's been times in my life where I've had to scrimp and save and try to get by. And it's difficult and it's not easy. And people have the assumption that people just don't want to work. If someone's not, I guess, economically in a place where they can afford things on their own and they do need assistance, people judge and make decisions, but they don't really know what that means. It could be just your average person who had health issues. that stopped them from working and making money, and in our society too. I agree with you in terms of healthcare. I think we're entitled to healthcare. We should have that. That is part of basic living and basic rights. And without healthcare, it puts people in a really bad way. I know for myself personally, having had a car accident and really not having health insurance, went through my savings really rapidly and had a very difficult time getting back on my feet.
Right. Yeah, you know, one thing I think that a lot of Americans don't understand too clearly is that not having health care or just being poor or relatively poor, that it actually kills. That is, inequality kills people.
Yes.
A study by the an American Health Journal found that in 1 year alone, as many as possibly 133,000 Americans had died from various forms of social equality, from having to live in environmentally damaged communities, to malnutrition, to not having access to health care. It has real consequences. And when people think about war, very often, at least where America is concerned, you're talking about a handful of people, relatively speaking, whereas every year, for instance, 33,000 people die from gun violence in this country. Or in 1 year, as many people die from lack of health care as died in the whole 10 years of the Vietnam War. And so there's a kind of tunnel vision that people have because they have this very narrow view of peace and war usually. And they may be afraid of terrorism, for instance, but terrorism has never cost anywhere near the number of lives that we cost each other because of our social and political system and the inequalities in it. Because you're talking about year after year after year, tens of thousands of Americans dying from different forms of social inequality and injustice. There's never been a war in our history that's cost us anything like that number of deaths. And it's just because we don't see that we're at war with each other in a way, and that's the big war in our lives.
That's a really great point.
It's what we do to each other.
That's a really great point, and you're right. There is a lot of misinformation out there about what's happening and what we are experiencing. You know, a lot of us are so removed. We get up, we go to work, do our day, and then come home, and then we're done. And we don't look at anything else. We don't really see anything else that's happening. And quite often, a lot of the stuff you're talking about is not reported in the news. It's not. What is the words they use? It's not sexy. It's not something that gets headlines, and it's not something that everybody's drawn to. It doesn't create the drama. And so I find that a lot of that isn't being reported, and it's necessary to be seen. And unfortunately, no one talks about that. You know, and I think it's a conversation that needs to get started and really needs to be addressed because we can't continue on this way, the way that we're going.
Yeah, you're talking partly about the media too, and you're trying to do something about that by talking about our social fabric in the form of alternative media. And that's part of I think the responsibility of grassroots people. Because everybody in every town has to say, well, that's fixing things isn't a job for some professional. It's not the job for our legislators or our government in Washington. It's something that if it's going to work, it starts with all of us at the grassroots in our communities every day. The way that we think about each other and the way that we try to talk to each other. And that's where good information comes from. And that's why the Peace Alliance is there, because we're just a small a little fragment of the community life in this town and neighboring towns where people can begin to think about some of the things we have to think about.
Share some of those causes that you do work with.
Yeah, because as I said earlier, we don't think of peace as a limited thing. We think of it as being responsible for creating a livable life for everybody. So over time, we've been involved in various kinds of causes, and we try in our signs and in our conversations with people to talk about the things that are current at the time. Because now when the Peace Alliance first formed, that was back in 1979, and it was right after the 3 Mile Island nuclear disaster in Pennsylvania, where a nuclear plant had gone into partial meltdown. And so that was a big crisis at the time, because people realized, well, our nuclear plants aren't safe. They could really be, in their effect, as bad as nuclear weapons.
I have a question before you go
yeah.
on. So back in 1979 when it started, do you feel that more people were more active in their community than they are now? Or do you think people are becoming more active again? Or do you think people are kind of shut out from that?
I think that there were some concerns that were very much on people's minds at that time, and certainly nuclear weapons and even nuclear energy, that those were high priority concerns at the time because of the Cold War too.
Absolutely.
So people were susceptible to talking about nuclear weapons. That's something that has died down a bit over time.
Was that something that the media, now this is a question for you because we talked about the media, did the media talk about that stuff back then versus how they speak about things today?
Well, one reason that people noticed the meltdown of the 3 Mile Island plant was that there had been this film called The China Syndrome with Jane Fonda. And so it was a fictional scenario, but then in real life in our own country, that same kind of thing was happening. And I think that it alerted people to the problems, and our group formed. And very quickly then recognized the need to address nuclear weapons as well. And so the group became part of the Nuclear Freeze movement, which was a national movement. But then over time, we have addressed a lot of other issues. Now, sometimes there's a shooting war, of course, or people are, I remember there was a great deal of turmoil in 1991 before the Persian Gulf War. Should we or should we not attack Saddam Hussein's Iraq? And so the Peace Alliance joined with several other community groups here all the way to New Haven even, to talk about the war and whether we should be opposing it and why, what was really going on, what were our government's real motives. And over time, of course, then we've seen that that first war in 1991 really destroyed the social fabric of Iraq. It was not the war that Mr. Bush led us into after 9/11. It was that first war that destroyed Iraq economically and politically, and it was placed under crushing sanctions. And a lot of things that we see today now with parts of the Middle East unraveling come from that initial breakdown, and people realizing that in that part of the world that they were vulnerable to Western attack. And that had been seen already in Iran, for instance. The United States had helped to overthrow their democratically elected, really quite progressive prime minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, and helped to establish the dictatorship of the Shah of Iran. So for it's important to realize that there are long-term consequences to everything that we do, and they're usually global consequences. So we were there as part of this national discussion.
So as the Peace Alliance, you've been participating in
in a small way in our community, we were trying to talk about what is this war, what's it really about. And now, well over 20 years later, we've seen the consequences of the destruction of the social fabric of Iraq. And if there's a perfect example of what we were talking about earlier, that war is just sort of an extreme consequence of the breakdown of society. When we by we I mean the Western coalition, destroyed Iraq economically and politically in the 90s, we were laying the foundation for this ongoing breakdown, which has been spreading all the way across the Middle East. And now it comes back to haunt us, of course. We're afraid. We're afraid of terrorism. We're afraid of ISIS. We see one group after another, and that's threatening to perhaps involve us in a shooting war. So these things, they're not separate categories. Everything that we do in a small way every day in our community has effects later. And so then recently the Peace Alliance became involved with the whole question of fracking, fracked gas, and the way it's being transported through Connecticut. Connecticut doesn't frack itself. The fracked gas and oil that come through here come from places like Pennsylvania, from the Marcellus Shale fields. But Connecticut has been providing a pipeline for this material to go through our state, and it's being exported to other states. And a lot of it leaks out here. It's emitted into the air through the compressor stations. There was a compressor station that's been modified just lately in Guilford, just a few months ago, and it's emitting methane gas, and there are leaks of the pipelines all over our state, all over the country, that are contaminating water. And this is an enormous problem because Connecticut is trying to expand the natural gas pipeline here, even though we do not need additional gas, and even though this dangerous material is mainly being run through our state to export abroad to make money for energy companies.
I want to stop you for a moment. This is something that this is personal to me as well, because I'm a very strong connection to the planet and the earth, and many light workers that do what I do, that is something that they're very connected to. But it's a valid point to bring up here in this show because it pertains to our community. And most people think, oh, fracking doesn't happen here, we're good. We don't have to worry about it. And again, it goes back to my belief where people think if it's not directly impacting you in that moment, you're not seeing it and you're not aware of it and you don't know what's happening. And you're like, well, that's not affecting me, I'm fine, until one day it does affect them. And one of the things that I struggle with in terms of the fracking is that often people think, okay, fine, it's happening over there, but it's not going to affect my area. But if anybody knows about groundwater and what happens underneath the earth, how it's all connected, everything that happens there moves around. Water can't be contained. It doesn't just stay.
Yes.
It actually moves. It's a living, breathing thing. And it will ultimately affect every one of us on this planet. No one will be excluded. No one will be immune to the effects of it. And I think it's a really valid point that you bring it up, because I know for myself, I didn't know very much about fracking, but I've really educated myself in the last several years about what it was and what exactly it does. And that's something I encourage everyone to really check out and find out for yourself about what's out there and what you can do in your area. Going back to the anti-fracking, so that is ultimately what the Peace Alliance is connected with, the anti-fracking movement.
Yes, that's one of our recent involvements. We were part of a group of 3 or 4 different organizations that was trying to get the town committee to review its policies about fracking. Should we be allowing the pipeline expansion, the modifications to this compressor station in Guilford? And there's a statewide moratorium right now on the disposal of fracking waste, which is extremely toxic and radioactive. And that was recognized in Connecticut a few years ago. That's why the state passed a ban on anyone from these other states bringing radioactive fracking waste into our state to dispose of. But that's expiring next year. And this is another dangerous thing that we're trying to bring up in the town of Guilford. And actually six towns in Connecticut have already passed bans against the disposal of waste. But a lot of people think, oh, well, DEEP, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, will protect us, where they won't let fracking waste come into the state. Or our state legislators are going to protect us. They're going to pass some kind of a a statewide ban to protect us from methane leaking into our water and contaminating it, as it's happened in a number of other states.
I have a couple questions and thoughts about that. So, what you just said there is the ban is going to stop?
Yes, it expires in July of next year. And then supposedly the state, working with DEEP, is supposed to come up with some kind of statewide protection or regulation. But this is really a forlorn hope. DEEP has not been effective so far at protecting the public from environmental hazards. Our hazardous waste facilities in the state, if anyone from outside started bringing in the waste to process here, this would be a disaster, because our 3 hazardous waste facilities in Connecticut are already unable to protect us from just the normal toxics that we already have. And so relying on an organization that is under pressure from in economic interests and from government interests, that's not a good thing. The public needs to say, town by town, we don't want fracking in the state. We don't want the pipelines expanded. We demand a ban in our own town. This has happened in neighboring states, in New York, Massachusetts, other places, Vermont, and they've already passed a lot of bans. And once the towns begin to pass bans, the state authorities recognize that this is the will of the people and that the people are concerned about it. And then they're much more likely to take steps to protect the public and acknowledge that this is the way that people are thinking. And they can risk their political careers. They need to know where the public stands in order to be able to afford to live up to their principles.
Absolutely, and I think that people need to get involved more and pay attention to what's happening, because I was not even aware that the ban was up next year. So that's actually very good knowledge for myself, but also for the viewers. And I want to bring us back to the Guilford Peace Alliance. So how does that play into the Peace Alliance in terms of protecting the environment? I'd like you to mention that again.
Yes, well, as I said, the group began originally with environmental concerns, and we've carried on with those. And so we joined with a couple of other groups, a committee in one of the local churches, and with the Sierra Club. And we started to collect petitions, and we handed them into the town committee, hoping that they would pass ordinances to protect the town, which has now happened, as I said, in 6 other towns in Connecticut, and others are working to try to have bans both against gas pipeline expansion and against the future disposal of fracking waste here. And because there's been a lot of suppression of the effects of fracking in the rest of the country, there are many states where you already see this damage.
Yes.
And the results have been suppressed even by the Environmental Protection Agency, because there's government pressure on them. And so they hid the results of some of the negative results of some of these tests. I mean, when you can't count on even on your federal environmental agencies to protect you. You know you have to do it yourself.
Even in, I remember reading something about, I believe it was Oklahoma, and how they had maybe, I don't know, under a 3.0 earthquake, and there was, and I'm probably going to get the numbers wrong, so don't quote me, but I'm going to try to remember. This was an article I read a few months ago. They had, under a 3.0 earthquake, they had like maybe 100 a year. And now they have hundreds, over 3.0 a year, all due to the fracking. And again, it comes back to like whatever's happening underground is happening. You can't just ignore that. It's actually happening. And earthquakes, you could say, oh, well, it just affects that area. No, it actually affects outward. It's a ripple effect. And if anybody understands how tectonic plates work, it's affecting outward, and then it causes earthquakes elsewhere.
Exactly.
And so I want to bring it back to like why I hear what you're saying in terms of the Guilford Peace Alliance, and how what your mission is to really get people to hear that peace is not just going to war and battle. I mean, that is something that you're thinking about. You want to help people. You don't want wars to happen, and that's like something that I don't even want to hear about or see either, because that's not peaceful. But peace is more than just preventing war. It's about actually having peace at home, peace on the earth, and within your environment, and safety for you.
Yeah. Yes, you have to think about, for instance, what is your society invested in? A lot of our money, a lot of our energy, of our scientific ability goes into war, into manufacturing armaments. The United States has been the chief exporter of arms to the rest of the world. And it's justified in some people's eyes because it makes a lot of money for a few companies.
And it's also fear. It's fear-based.
It's
fear. Rather coming. It's not coming from a place of peace. You know, and one of the things that I teach about in my world and what I talk about often is that how could we actually want world peace if we don't know what peace is within us? And so I always say we need to start with us individually at home and start to learn to get calm and find a balance for us, and then go outward and share that with other people. And with the light working community, particularly that I work closely with, my belief is that we're all here to help each other find that peace inside of us, but then to expand it out so that we're not alone. And we know we're not alone. And we come together as groups and gather for causes such as what you're speaking of.
Yes. If you think about your society and you realize what it's invested in economically and how its policies are structured, if you think about the United States right now, for instance, it's a sort of feudal society with a few people at the top and many, and most of the rest of the people in a kind of a pyramid down to extreme poverty. It's an aristocracy. It's an oligarchy, people often call it. This is what Bernie Sanders' revolution was about, and the Occupy movement, talking about the 99%.
That's often forgotten. We only hear about what the 1% wants.
Exactly,
Yes.
and a lot of our laws are based on the idea of protecting the privileges of the 1%, and that's what this current election has been about. People haven't actually talked about the issues very much, but underlying people's unhappiness in this country has been the realizing that it's a very unequal society and that certain groups are living at the expense of others, and that we have a great many laws now on the books that need changing, and we need people who can come in and oppose special interests is what they're usually called, but who can redress the tax system to something closer to what it was in the 70s, where people are of high income are paying something nearer to what they were paying then. Because you can't starve the government or starve the rest of your people and expect anything to work out well. It won't. You'll just have more and more things that are going wrong. And the Citizens United decision that was handed down by the Supreme Court recently has been very bad, because it's allowed corporations to fund political campaigns.
Right.
And if you have spent time in other countries, as I have, you realize that it's important to have an electoral system that isn't based on money. For instance, one way to solve this is by publicly financing campaigns. I've lived in Britain, and there they have a short election season, about 6 weeks, and money for the most part it's not raised from the public, because the television stations are expected to donate time, equal time, to the different parties, and what you get is not a clash of personalities, but it's usually 5-minute segments that are about the platform of a particular party. You'll get an announcement that says, the following is a party political announcement from the Conservative Party, and you'll get 5 minutes of that. And it's the same amount of time that is given to the other parties. And it's a much more it's a much fairer and more equal system. Because money is kept out of it. And so one of the problems in the country now is this.
As you mentioned earlier, Bernie Sanders, I mean,
Right.
he showed us that it's so possible to run a campaign with small contributions, and you don't need big money to join in to help you.
Yes.
He did it. He did something that seemed almost impossible, but he showed it is possible. And I want to, bring up the fact that one of the reasons that I'm doing this show, this is not my forte. I'm doing this show because I was working on the Bernie Sanders campaign. I wanted Bernie to be our president, and I created a group called Light Workers for Bernie. And out of that, I wanted to offer back to the community, what can I give? What can I do? And that's how I came up with the show and the idea of bringing guests on like yourself to talk about what's out there, what's available for other people to join into and learn about. Because a lot of the community organizations that are out there, being active in our community, we don't hear very much about. And again, media doesn't always give exposure to all those things. And so I found that, Bernie has created this great movement by just being with his presence and showing us there's other ways and reminding us that we do have power as the 99%, versus just being the 1%.
Yes, and he's been very effective in his own state because he's actually he's been governing a state where not as a governor, but as congressman and a senator, as earlier as the mayor of Burlington. He's governed communities where there's 100% renewable energy, or where health care is really available to all people. And he's been living by this for decades now. And he has shown that it is possible. So although, for instance, Peace Alliance is a very small group, we feel that everyone has to start somewhere. And we always will be a small group. We have members mainly from Guilford, but sometimes a few people who are from Madison or Brantford.
Is everyone welcome? Anybody, even if they're not from the local?
Anybody is welcome to come, yeah.
How can they come and participate? What can they do?
I think that the single most important thing is simply coming to talk and trying to understand and grapple with what's going on for yourself, and then you take it back to your family and community. Of course, if you're living nearby and you want to have a relationship with us, then you can join in some of our activities. So other people can come with their ideas and make suggestions and participate to whatever level they want to. They can come to hearings if they feel like signing a petition on behalf of banning fracking waste in the town. That's another way they could help.
Are all ages welcome?
Oh yes, absolutely. In fact, we would love it if some younger people would come, because many of us who were around at the founding are getting ancient like me. So we would welcome some interest from younger people. They can, if you actually come and talk with us, you probably will find that the things that are concerning young people today they have connections to what we are doing.
Right. Right.
And so they may like to come along and stand with us on the green and perhaps bring some signs about their own issues.
Yeah.
If they're concerned about student debt, or even about drugs in their school, or about their concerns about whether they'll have a job when they graduate from high school.
Is the Peace Alliance open to new ideas from them? Like if young people join, like new ideas about how they want to have the Peace Alliance noticed or out there?
Yes, absolutely, and we'd welcome people who have projects. If someone comes along and says, well, I think this is an important idea, and I want to do something for this town, for this community, for the whole state, and I have an idea. I'd like to go and talk to other people in the high school about this, or I'd like to get behind a campaign to solarize people's houses so we can get to be 100% renewable energy. That's what we need, is energy and people who care.
Wonderful. And Jan, how can they get in touch with you? How can people contact you and find out more about the Peace Alliance?
Well, you can go on to Facebook under Guilford Peace Alliance. Then we have 3 email addresses that you can put them on the screen maybe later so people can read them, and you can email us. The easiest way is on a Saturday morning to come to the corner of Whitfield and Boston Street, opposite Page Hardware and opposite Cilantro's, and talk to our people and get onto our mailing list. We let people know about events in the area that are important to them. If you belong to some of the local churches, like the First Congregational Church, people, many of them know about us, and the Shoreline Unitarian Church in Madison knows about us.
And will you be out there in the cold weather too? Because it's starting to get cold here in Connecticut.
We try to be, and we have a member called Luce who tries to be there, rain or shine, and she's a great supporter of peace from the inside, the kind of thing that you talk about. That the peace is the way inwardly, not just the political peace, but the peace of actually being a healing force in the world. She's very kind and gentle person, and so you'll be very lucky if you run into Luce and
That's
talk
wonderful.
to her. I won't be here I'll be here a few more weeks, but then I'm going to be traveling a bit, partly to do some networking with some civic organizations in other countries and
Wonderful.
some research.
So you can find Jan on the Green or the rest of the Guilford Peace Alliance every Saturday from 11 to 12, correct?
Yes.
And if you wish to reach out to them, please do so. And as you can heard, it's getting colder, so they probably would welcome a hot coffee or a hot chocolate. So I'm just going to throw that out there as an option. It's a great way to start a conversation. Would you like a cup of tea? That might be a great way. If I'm there, bring me tea. I don't do coffee. I don't do caffeine. But I wanted to also let you know that on my page, on my Facebook page, In This Together, I will also have their information, and I will post a link to their site so you can find them that way as well. And you'll have my email and a way to contact me. And I want to thank you, Jan, for speaking with me today and giving me some great insight actually into the history of Guilford, not just into the history of the Guilford Peace Alliance. I appreciate that's more than I knew. So I'm very grateful for that and grateful for all that you had to offer for all of our viewers. And I want to say to everyone, thank you for listening to me on this journey of mine, this mission. I don't know where it's headed. I have no idea what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to what's going forward. But I'm really looking forward to connecting with everybody who is interested in communicating with me and connecting with my show and to bring me some ideas. So if you or someone you know is part of a community organization or you want to know more about one of them, please feel free to contact me at my email or at my Facebook page, In This Together, and I would love to talk with you, have a conversation, and a cup of tea would be great. Again, we're all in this together. So thank you, and join me again for another show.
We are in this together.